All right, so today we're diving into some pretty intense stuff. A global trade war. We're talking tariffs flying around, alliances shifting, all that.
It's a big one.
You might be thinking, okay, what's that got to do with me? But that's what we're looking at today. How this trade war specifically between the U.S. and China, Canada, and Mexico could impact Ireland.
Right.
Even though Ireland isn't directly involved, we're using this recent podcast by the Irish Compass YouTube channel as our guide to kind of see how this could all play out.
Interesting.
Yeah.
It really makes you think, can any country really stay untouched by something like this?
Yeah.
A global trade war.
Yeah.
Especially in today's world, everything's so interconnected. Those ripple effects, they could reach pretty far.
Yeah, that's what we're here to figure out.
Yeah.
So to set the scene, President Trump recently imposed a 25% tariff on all imports from Canada and Mexico.
Wow.
And then he also added another 10% on goods from China, like electronics and machinery. And what's interesting is that he targeted entire countries, not just specific products.
Yeah, that's a key difference here.
Right.
Between this and a typical trade dispute. It's way more aggressive, you know?
Yeah.
Usually, countries try to target specific industries or products, but this is like a blanket tariff on everything.
Yeah, and those targeted countries didn't just sit back, they retaliated. Canada hit back with tariffs of their own on American dairy, beef, and industrial goods.
Right.
Mexico's taking a more measured approach, but they're still planning to issue tariffs on U.S. goods, especially in agriculture and automotive parts.
Yeah, and I think what's important to think about here is that Canada and Mexico aren't just trying to, cause economic pain. These retaliatory tariffs are strategic moves to protect their own industries and send a message like, hey, we're not going to be pushed around.
Right. It's like a high-stakes game of economic chess.
Exactly.
But how does this impact Ireland? Well, the Irish Compass podcast we're looking at highlights how disruptions to these industries, especially in sectors like automotive parts, could disrupt global supply chains. To be honest, I don't fully get what supply chain disruptions even means in this context.
Okay, so think of it this way. A supply chain is like a relay race.
Yeah.
Each runner has a specific part to play in getting the baton to the finish line.
Right.
If one runner falls or stumbles, the whole race is impacted.
Makes sense.
So in this case, if the U.S. can't get its usual supply of auto parts from Mexico because of these tariffs, that could slow down car production in the U.S., drive up costs.
Okay.
And eventually, those disruptions, they can impact car prices worldwide and even affect businesses in Ireland that depend on those parts.
So it's not just the initial players in this trade war that feel the effects. It's like a domino effect.
Exactly. And that brings us to China. They're known for taking a more long-term approach, right?
Right.
So far, they've restricted American tech firms from their markets and raised tariffs on U.S. agricultural products, like soybeans and pork.
Okay, that seems like a pretty big deal.
It is.
But China isn't necessarily throwing everything they have at the U.S. right now.
Right. What's crucial here is that China is shifting its investments away from the U.S. and towards other markets, including Europe.
Okay.
And this opens a door for countries like Ireland, which are seen as stable and reliable partners.
So let's get to the heart of it. How could this trade war actually affect Ireland? The Irish Compass podcast expects a mix of positive and negative impacts, right?
Exactly. There are potential upsides and downsides.
Okay, so let's start with the potential negatives. One of the biggest concerns is those supply chain disruptions we talked about earlier. The Irish Compass podcast gave an example of an Irish manufacturer that relies on Chinese electronic components.
Right.
If those tariffs make those components more expensive, it squeezes their profits, right? And makes them less competitive.
Absolutely. This is a real risk for any Irish business that depends on global supply chains. Think about it. How many steps are involved in getting a product from raw materials to finished goods?
Yeah.
Every step along the way could be affected by tariffs, leading to higher costs and delays.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then there's the potential for reduced demand from the U.S. Ireland exports a huge amount of goods to the U.S. every year, about 52 billion euros worth.
Yeah, that's a significant chunk of Ireland's exports. If American companies tighten their belts because of the trade war and reduce their spending, Irish exports could take a hit.
Right.
This could be especially concerning for key Irish industries like pharmaceuticals, which rely heavily on the U.S. market.
Yeah.
You can see job losses, a slowdown in those sectors.
That doesn't sound good. And to make things even more uncertain, Trade wars tend to spook the financial markets, right?
Right.
What happens if the euro weakens against a stronger U.S. dollar?
Well, imagine a scenario where those medical devices from the U.S. that Irish hospitals rely on suddenly cost 10% more because of the exchange rate.
Right.
Puts a strain on healthcare budgets. Could impact patient care.
Yeah.
These aren't just hypothetical situations. A weaker euro could impact everything from software and machinery to everyday goods, making them more expensive for Irish businesses and consumers.
Okay, so we've talked about the potential downsides, supply chain disruptions, decreased demand from the U.S., and the uncertainty in financial markets. It sounds like Ireland could be in for a rough ride, but the Irish Compass podcast also mentioned some potential positive impacts, right?
Yes, definitely. While the trade war presents challenges, it also creates opportunities
Okay.
for countries like Ireland to strengthen their position in the global market.
Okay, let's hear about those. What kind of opportunities are we talking about?
Well, one of the most interesting opportunities is the potential for Ireland to become a new trading partner for countries like Canada and China.
Okay.
Those countries are looking to bypass U.S. tariffs.
Right.
And this could be a huge win for Irish industries like food, technology, and financial services.
So instead of relying so heavily on trade with the U.S., Ireland could diversify its trading partners, strengthen its relationships with other key players in the global market.
Precisely. The Irish Compass podcast gave the example of China needing to replace all that American beef and dairy they're no longer importing because of the tariffs.
Right.
Ireland, with its strong agricultural sector and reputation for high-quality food, could be perfectly positioned to step in and fill that gap.
It's like one door closing and another one opening. What about Canada? What kind of opportunities might arise there?
Well, Canada could start relying more on Irish software firms, for example, to reduce their dependence on American tech providers. This trade war could reshape global supply chains and create new alliances, and Ireland could be right in the middle of it.
So it's not just about finding new customers for existing products, it's about seizing the opportunity to innovate, develop new products and services that meet the evolving demands of the global market.
Exactly. It's about being proactive and adaptable, not just reacting to the changing landscape, but anticipating it and positioning yourself for success.
It's like turning a crisis into an opportunity. Speaking of opportunities, the Irish Compass podcast also talked about the possibility of increased investment in Ireland. How could that play out?
Well, think about it. Companies that are worried about U.S. tariffs might decide to set up shop in Ireland to gain access to the EU's tariff-free market.
Okay.
Ireland could become a safe haven for businesses looking to avoid the trade war crossfire.
I can see that. It's like seeking shelter from a storm. What kind of companies might be looking to relocate or invest in Ireland?
Imagine Chinese firms choosing Dublin over New York for their European headquarters, because they're concerned about U.S. tariffs and trade restrictions.
All right.
Or Canadian manufacturers investing in Irish factories to sell across Europe without facing those trade barriers.
That would be a huge boost for the Irish economy. New jobs, new investments, new opportunities. It's starting to sound like Ireland could actually come out ahead in all of this. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. The Irish Compass podcast was also pretty clear about the need for Ireland to be strategic, right? What did they recommend?
They emphasized the importance of diversifying suppliers and markets, strengthening ties with China and Canada, and supporting local industries. It's about building a more resilient economy that's less reliant on any single trading partner.
It's like hedging your bets, making sure you're not putting all your eggs in one basket. It seems like there's a real emphasis on self-sufficiency and building a stronger foundation for the Irish economy.
Yes, and that includes supporting local industries. If Irish businesses can step up and fill the gaps created by disruptions in global supply chains, that could create new jobs and boost the domestic economy.
So while there are certainly challenges ahead, there are also some really interesting opportunities for Ireland to capitalize on. It's like navigating a complex maze, but with the potential for a big reward at the end.
And that's why this situation is so fascinating to analyze. It's like a giant game of economic chess, with each country making strategic moves and trying to anticipate the consequences.
And Ireland, even though it's not directly involved in this trade war, is right there on the chessboard, carefully planning its next move. We've talked about the potential risks and opportunities, the importance of diversification, education, and government support. But what does all of this actually mean for the average person in Ireland? How might this trade war affect their daily lives?
Well, as we've discussed, a weaker euro could make imported goods more expensive.
Right.
potentially affecting everything from everyday items to larger purchases. This could put a strain on household budgets and impact consumer spending.
So that vacation to Italy or that new phone might suddenly become more expensive.
Exactly. And it's not just about luxury items. Those imported ingredients for your favorite dishes at the local restaurant might cost more, which could lead to higher prices on the menu.
Yeah, that's a real-world impact that people can relate to. What else should people be aware of?
Well, there's also the potential for job losses in certain sectors, particularly those heavily reliant on exports to the U.S. This could create economic uncertainty and hardship for families who depend on those industries.
Right. It's a reminder that even events happening far away can have a real impact on people's lives. But we also talked about the potential for new jobs to be created in areas like food and agriculture, technology, and financial services.
Yes, and that's where the importance of education and skills development comes in.
Right.
People need to be prepared for the jobs of the future, which might require different skills and knowledge than the jobs of the past.
So it's about being adaptable, embracing lifelong learning, always being willing to upskill, acquire new knowledge to stay ahead of the curve.
Exactly. And it's not just about individual workers. It's about Ireland as a nation investing in its people, ensuring that its workforce is equipped to compete in a rapidly changing global economy.
It's like strengthening the foundation of the entire economy, making sure it's built to withstand the storms of global uncertainty. So we've got potential price increases, possible job losses in some sectors, but also the possibility of new jobs emerging in different areas. What's the overall takeaway? Should people be worried, excited, cautiously optimistic?
I think a healthy dose of cautious optimism is a good approach.
Okay.
This trade war is a significant event with the potential to disrupt the global economy, and Ireland will inevitably feel some of those tremors.
Yeah.
But it's not all doom and gloom. There are also real opportunities for Ireland to emerge from this stronger and more prosperous.
So while there are challenges ahead, there's also a sense of possibility and potential. It's like embarking on a new adventure. There will be risks and uncertainties, but also the chance to discover new horizons and achieve great things.
Exactly. And with careful planning, strategic decision-making, and a willingness to adapt, Ireland can navigate the challenges and seize the opportunities presented by this evolving global landscape.
This has been a fascinating deep dive, and I'm sure our listeners are eager to hear your final thoughts on how Ireland can make the most of this situation and what the future might hold.
They highlight a few key strategies. First, they stress the importance of diversification.
Okay.
Not relying too heavily on any single trading partner.
Right.
Instead, expanding trade relationships with countries like Canada and China. This reduces Ireland's vulnerability to economic shocks, creates more stability in the long run.
So it's about spreading the risk, not putting all your eggs in one basket. What other strategies did they recommend?
The podcast also emphasized investing in education and skills development. This means ensuring that Ireland's workforce has the training and knowledge to succeed in the industries of the future, particularly in growing sectors like technology and renewable energy.
It's like preparing for a marathon, making sure you're training the right muscles, developing the stamina you need to reach the finish line.
Precisely. It's about investing in Ireland's human capital, which is ultimately the key to long-term economic success. And finally, the podcast highlighted the need for a supportive government policy environment, one that encourages investment, reduces bureaucracy, and fosters innovation.
So it's about creating fertile ground for businesses to grow and thrive, providing the resources and support they need to flourish. It sounds like Ireland has a roadmap. But this trade war is still ongoing, right? There's no telling how things will ultimately play out.
That's true. This is a dynamic situation with a lot of moving pieces. And Ireland will need to stay agile, adapt to new challenges as they arise. But the key takeaway from the Irish Compass podcast is that this trade war, while disruptive, could ultimately be a catalyst for positive change. It could push Ireland to diversify its economy, strengthen its global partnerships, and invest in its people in ways that create a more resilient and prosperous future.
It's like that saying, smooth seas never made a skilled sailor. This trade war, as challenging as it may be, could ultimately help Ireland become an even stronger and more competitive force in the global economy. But let's bring this back to our listeners. We've covered a lot of ground, potential risks, exciting opportunities, strategies for success. If you're listening to this in Ireland, what should you be thinking about?
I think the biggest takeaway is that even events happening far away, like a trade war between superpowers, can have a real impact on your daily life. It underscores how interconnected the global economy truly is. Pay attention to how these global shifts might affect your job, your finances, the cost of goods and services.
It's like realizing that even though you're on a small island, you're still part of a vast and interconnected ocean. What you do here can affect what happens on the other side of the world, and vice versa.
Exactly. And while that can feel daunting, it also means that you have the power to influence the course of events. By staying informed, engaging in thoughtful discussions, and making informed choices, you can help shape a more resilient and equitable future for yourself and for Ireland as a whole.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the potential impact of the U.S.-China trade war on Ireland, we want to leave you with one final thought. What industries in Ireland do you think are best positioned to benefit from this global shift? And what steps could the Irish government take to minimize the risks and maximize the potential rewards? We encourage you to explore these questions further, continue the conversation, and help shape Ireland's future in this rapidly changing world.
It's a complex issue with a lot of nuances. And the more perspectives we bring to the table, the better equipped we'll be to navigate the challenges and opportunities that lie ahead.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time for another fascinating exploration of the forces shaping our world.